and then start the Facebook Live. Just 1 second. All right. And I'll start sharing my slides. Okay, we are live. Hey everyone, welcome. Go ahead and put your name, pronouns, and location in the chat. And we have Myra joining us. Great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Amanda. I use she, her pronouns. This is the Policy Fellowship and H&P Advocates Training. We are covering Key Frameworks for Advocacy Part 2. So this is the second part of a two-part series for this trainings this month in August. Last week we had a training on racial justice by Vanita Ray and Max Boykin, which was a great session. And this week we have a Key Frameworks for Advocacy Part 2 on reproductive justice and gender justice. And so we're really excited to be following up last week's training with key frameworks for advocacy. I started these trainings with a quick preface on what these trainings are. So these trainings are for H&P advocates and PWN policy fellows, as well as larger PWN base. And our Health Not Prisons Advocates project increases meaningful participation and leadership by communities most harmed by HIV criminalization. And we also have our PWN Policy Fellows, which is a year-long program designed to support women, trans, and non-binary people living with HIV. And so the curriculum that we have laid out for our H&P advocates and our PWN Policy Fellows is really grounded in gender and racial justice and focuses on increasing knowledge on how policy decisions are made, how we can impact them, and how to advocate for transformation for a world that we want to see, right? A world where all women, trans, and non-binary people living with HIV can live long, healthy, and dignified lives free from stigma and discrimination. And we know that policies will have better outcomes for our communities when those who are most directly impacted by decisions are making those decisions. And so that's the main goal of the curriculum that we have. And this is just one part of this larger series of trainings that we have in store for all of us to learn together. And so for today's web session specifically, we have a few key objectives. So the first is to learn how reproductive justice and gender justice intersects with the HIV movement, with a specific focus on trans liberation. The second is to learn strategies in applying a reproductive justice and gender justice framework to policy advocacy, and to discuss policy initiatives that can ensure that we'll be able to meet our needs. Our logistics and agreements today, quickly, we are recording and live streaming. Please share your name and pronouns and locations in the chat if you're comfortable. Closed captioning is on for accessibility purposes, and some agreements for the space. There are really no dumb questions. So this is really a space to learn together, and we want folks to be feel free to ask those questions and have this collaborative kind of learning space together. We ask that the presenters have asked that you ask questions in the chat, and we'll keep track of them. We'll have a portion towards the end of the presentation to have a discussion and question and answer portion. But for now, we'll try to get through the presentation and then we'll have that space towards the end of the presentation to discuss and ask questions. All right. So with that, I am very excited to introduce our amazing presenters. So today we have Cecilia Chung. Cecilia uses she, her pronouns, and Cecilia is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Evaluation at the Transgender Law Center. Cecilia is an amazing partner and advocate to with PWN, and we're just so grateful to have Cecilia on with us today. So feel free to give Cecilia a big round of applause. I know we have about 48 folks on the call today. So yeah, feel free to welcome Cecilia in the chat. And thanks so much for sharing space with us today, Cecilia. And we're excited to hear from you. Next, we have Myra Franks. Myra uses she, her pronouns. Myra is an amazing advocate, PWN chapter member, and leader in the PWN-Alabama chapter. And we're just so excited to have Myra join us today to present on reproductive justice work and the work that and what reproductive justice means to her. So a round of applause for Myra. Thank you so much for joining us. And last but definitely not least, we have Sallie. Sallie uses she, her pronouns. Sallie is an HIV policy specialist, specifically around decrim work. Sallie is a PWN staff member, a former IFWN Howe Fellow, and a really amazing colleague. So we're excited to have Sallie join us today. So yes, please feel free to welcome Sallie in the chat. Yes, thank you to our presenters today. So with that, we'll first jump into reproductive justice. I'll pass it along to Sallie.
Thanks, Amanda, and hello, everyone. Excited to be here having this conversation with you. We just wanted to start out by explaining a little bit about the reproductive justice movement. So the reproductive justice movement came into its own in June 1994 in response to critical gaps in the women's rights movement and the fight for reproductive health and rights. So 12 Black women leaders gathered in a hotel room to discuss how to address the disparities. The group called themselves the Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice and bought full-page ads in the Washington Post and Roll Call that featured over 800 signatures calling for any healthcare reform package to include the concerns of Black women. 3 years later, 16 organizations, including Black, Asian American, Latina, and Indigenous women, got together to create Sister Song, a collective devoted to the reproductive and sexual health of women and gender nonconforming people of color based in Atlanta. And Sister Song still is hot and thriving, for sure. Some of the founding mothers may be familiar names to you. One that stands out, well, two that stand out to me are Loretta Ross and Mabel Thomas. And there have also been many other RJ warriors that have come along the way, like Monica Simpson, who's the ED at Sister Song, Dazon Dixon Diallo at Sister Love, and so on and so on. Next slide, please. And I can pass to Myra.
Oh, okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Myra. Myra Franks from rural Alabama. And we're going to talk about reproductive justice, the core tenets. Reproductive justice is a human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children if you choose, and to parent those children in safe and sustainable communities. Now, when we say bodily autonomy, it is the right for a person to be in control of what happens to their body without having outside influences or people coercing them or, just going with how the mainstream would want you to be. People, they have the right to choose. And it's not just about abortion. Reproductive justice is not just about abortion. It entails just about every area of my life. And I knew that there was a name. I knew what it was. I could feel it. I could see it every day. but I didn't have a name for it. Okay. But it entails so much more. Reproductive justice recognizes that the ability of any person to determine what happens to their body is directly related to what is happening in their community. They recognize that human rights protections or violations will determine an individual. It will determine an individual's ability to exercise self-determination, excuse me. And we must work with other social justice movements to build, oh, forgive me, y'all. I'm having some technical difficulties. Okay, we must work with other social justice movements to build a new movement to save our lives and those of our family and communities. And this is directly from Sister Song, which Sallie just spoke about a few minutes ago. Okay, now it says that the ability of any person to determine what happens is directly related to what's going on in the community. And there are so many things that can affect us that are reproductive justice issues. For instance, during the slavery era, there were women, Black women who were enslaved, and they were being experimented on most of the time without any kind of anesthesia or anything. And and they're still doing experiments on people of color and Black people and other people of color, and it's just been going down through history. We see the separations of families from long ago, and it's still kind of going on now. And when we have the human rights protection for our rights, then a person is more able to exercise self-determination and make stands against injustices like this. So that's why it's really important that organizations and other social justice movements come together to build new movements and try to save our lives and those of our families and our communities. And it's just so much around reproductive justice that I could talk about. I've always heard about people living across the tracks. And there's a reason for that, because marginalized communities are usually across the tracks. And that being in this space, I've learned that across the tracks, and there are other markers like major highways and rivers that would that people of color and other marginalized communities, it would affect them in having a low interest rate in buying a house or having a high interest rate, depending on where you live, by one of these markers, like the tracks, railroad tracks, major highways, and the rivers. But there is just so much that I could say about reproductive justice, especially in the rural community. It involves, like I said, it's not just about to have a baby or abortion rights, but it allows people to make decisions of how they want to live their life in their own way, in their own space, to be free from stigma, criminalization, and other things that would affect, the quality of life.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Myra. And we'll come back to you too around kind of what reproductive justice means to you and the work that you've done in Alabama. So thank you so much. we'll go ahead and we'll go into reproductive justice and why it's intersectional. Myra, you've laid out beautifully what reproductive justice is and its tenets. And so really reproductive justice is intersectional, right? Intersectionality, a lot of folks have heard of this term. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1980s as a concept really core to reproductive justice and the RJ movement since its start. Intersectionality really acknowledges the multiple systems of oppression and inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, the multiple harms and dynamics really that that go into whether or not you choose to have a family or whether you're able to raise your family in a healthy and safe environment. This quote by Audre Lorde, I think really sums up intersectionality really well, which is that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. On the slide here, we have three different repro terms, right? Reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice. I know many folks on this call are familiar with these terms, but to provide us a refresher, reproductive health, right, mostly focuses on the provision of services, likely in like a healthcare setting. It's whether it is services like expanding access to preventative care, trans-inclusive healthcare services, etc. Reproductive rights focuses on the legal rights to reproductive services. And so it's, for example, fighting to keep abortion legal, which is a huge fight that we all know has become more of an issue in the last couple of years, especially with the fall of Roe v. Wade and the federal right to abortion. And then we have reproductive justice, right, which is focuses more on movement building and intersectionality. It really emphasizes the way that race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation really shape reproductive healthcare experiences, services, and policy, right? It's expansive and holistic. And so this is what we mean when we're talking about reproductive justice work, right? And not just reproductive health or reproductive rights. Reproductive justice is really grounded in human rights and social justice. It means really the true control over one's reproductive life and future, and requires access to resources, healthcare, affordable housing, economic security, a healthy environment, clean drinking water, safety net for families with resources when resources fail us, and a safe and dignified reproductive healthcare access. Reproductive justice necessarily challenges white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and racism. I know we covered our session last week covered the key framework of racial justice in policy advocacy. You'll hear this throughout this presentation today, but really these frameworks all are necessary and work together. You can't have one framework without the other, right? Reproductive justice means racial justice and trans liberation. And so although we're presenting these frameworks in kind of different sessions, they are all connected and necessary to one another. Speaking of intersectionality, right? All women means all women, right? Marginalized women and girls, trans and gender diverse people, with sex workers, women and girls with disabilities, young people. And so this is just one example of what we mean when we say all women. And I'll pass it to Sallie.
Thanks, Amanda. I just want to talk to y'all a little bit about reproductive oppression, which is the regulation, exploitation, and violence against people's bodies, sexuality, labor, and reproductive capacities as a strategy to control people and entire communities. The fact that Black and Brown people make up the majority of new HIV diagnoses in the US, and and especially in the US South, is a symptom of policies, both in the past and current, that perpetuate reproductive oppression, such as intentional failure to resource and support Black and Indigenous communities, while at the same time over-policing and over-incarcerating those same communities. Myra touched a bit on that when she spoke about being on the other side of the tracks. Oftentimes there's communities that just don't see the same amount of resources, especially in the rural South, as you do in some of the major cities. Also want to add that even things that might not on their face sound directly related to reproductive health care can be and are forms of reproductive oppression, precisely because they restrict people's ability to determine what does and does not happen to their bodies. So as you see on the screen, there's some examples of what is also considered to be reproductive oppression. So there's failure to offer comprehensive sex and reproductive health information and counseling to people living with HIV, forced sterilization of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women, people with disabilities, and people who are incarcerated, and people with HIV. Separation of families through slavery, boarding schools, the foster care system, mass incarceration, ICE, policies that make it hard to change gender markers on IDs, restricting and criminalizing immigrants, people of trans experience, sex workers, people with felonies, and restricted or lack of access to trans-inclusive reproductive health care, abortion, gender-affirming care, informed consent, maternal and perinatal care, and sexual health education. Just a tad bit on the forced sterilization. Between 2006 and 2010, 2 California state prisons had sterilized 148 incarcerated women without their knowledge and consent, most of whom were Black and Latinx, and close to 1,400 sterilizations have been performed on incarcerated women in that state between 1993 and 2013. Back to you, Myra.
Okay, reproductive justice. Like I said, it just entails so much. And one of those things that we have been doing is really my thing, voting. Voting, teaching people about voting rights. There are so many people who do not know that they did not lose the right to vote just because they have been involved in the prison system here in the state of Alabama. And that's one of the things we recently had a voting registration, education engagement drive in the Birmingham area, and it turned out well. We had some people to register, and we also educated some people, and education is key when it comes to things. Oh, by the way, happy National Voter Registration Day. That is today. So if you're not registered, get yourself registered, and take a friend with you. And remember to get to the polls and vote. Reproductive justice, I just see how it plays so big of a part in my life. With voting, that's the way that you can change some of these broken systems that we have. Yeah, it can change some of the broken systems, and it's your voice. Voting is your voice. We have done some legislative work with writing our legislators, particular about getting funding for people living with HIV and people of trans experience. There were some laws that came through the state, and you know, that's another thing of reproductive justice is how people, the environment that you live in, you know, the people that are around you. I see so many people, they feel like they have to leave the area where they grew up from just to be who they are. And these kind of things should not be so. Yes. Okay, I'll pass it back to Sallie.
Thanks, Myra. No, that was great. And I love that you connected voting rights to reproductive justice and the ability to like be able to have a say in your community and the laws and policies that really make up what it means to be in a healthy and safe community, right? For you, your family, access to healthcare, right? I know Alabama has done a lot of work around Medicaid expansion in the state, for example, which intersects with reproductive health care. And so, yeah, it's great to hear. Thank you for sharing. And
we partnered with a couple of organizations, and we're closer to expanding healthcare in Alabama than we have been, but the system is still so broken. Since the rollback of federal funds for from the COVID epidemic, a lot of people are losing insurance. So that's another thing that we're looking at. I actually have a friend who she's been diagnosed with cancer, and some of her insurance was cut off, and it's just kind of heartbreaking to hear these stories.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for bringing that in and for sharing that work and for leading in that work and at the Alabama within the Alabama chapter. So it's so great, and also especially to hear from you what reproductive justice means to you and how it's so expansive and really touches so many parts of your life. And yeah, that I think we really appreciate having you on. So yeah, with that, I think I want to also open it up to others on right now. What is one word to describe what reproductive justice means to you? I know Myra shared that it means having full voting rights. It means having access to healthcare. It means rural communities having access to crucial healthcare services. So feel free to add in the chat now what reproductive justice means to you. Myra, I see that you put housing. Gracie put control. I think that's a great word. Bodily autonomy, I think, is important, right? Exactly, Shakina. Freedom. Yeah. Feel free to drop your words in the chat. Leah, resources. Great. With that, I'll go ahead and first, I also want to invite Cecilia. I know, Cecilia, you're on. Is there anything else you want to add to the conversation? A word that you would like that you would use to describe reproductive justice and what it means to you?
I guess, I've been involved with the movement before the 90s. So back then, we also talk about sovereignty, who has sovereignty to our own body. So, it literally, means that, nobody else should be making decisions for our body but ourselves. And I think that, that word really also resonate with some of the movement as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Cecilia. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. But I think we'll pass it to Sallie, and then after Sallie, we'll have Cecilia present. So take it away, Sallie.
Thanks, Amanda. And Cecilia, if at any point you want to add your brilliance to my portion, please do. I'll be absolutely honored to hear your thoughts on some of the things that I have put together. So this portion is just going to be a bit about gender justice and trans liberation and how that is reproductive justice. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to uplift PWN's vision. As members and of PWN, it's important that we all are in line with the vision of the org. So PWN envisions a world where all self-identified women living with HIV can live long, healthy, and dignified lives, free from stigma and discrimination. A note about the asterisk: Positive Women's Network defines self-identified women living with HIV as including women, people of trans experience, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people with HIV who choose to be part of PWN's membership body. I also want to state that PWN, as I kind of said already, PWN does expect our members to be in line with our vision, and we do not tolerate transphobia or transphobia in any of our spaces. We also do not support spaces that intentionally or purposefully exclude trans and gender non-conforming folks. Essentially because in order for us all to get free, the Black trans woman needs to win. Next slide, please. This is a little about PWN's policy agenda. It was created in 2018 that has 6 policy priorities. And yes, we envision and work toward a future in which all people of trans experience are supported to live fulfilling, secure, and happy lives, free from all forms of violence and harassment, hostility, or discrimination. That is our vision as a policy team and as PWN, as a policy tenant within PWN, sorry. Next slide, please. Okay, cool. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about what trans-centered reproductive justice is. As stated before, Sister Song defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, to not have children, and to parent those children in safe and sustainable communities. This vision can only be achieved when all people have the economic, social, and political power necessary to make healthy decisions about their bodies, reproduction, and sexuality without threat of violence, coercion, stigma, or discrimination. Reproductive justice demands that all people, not just cisgender people, have these rights. Basic human needs such as access to quality healthcare, economic security, and the ability to live free from violence are essential to reproductive justice, but are not a reality for many transgender individuals. Trans-centered reproductive justice is an approach to RJ that centers the experiences, needs, and power of those whose genders and sexualities are most marginalized and most targeted for state and police violence. Next slide, please. Oh, well, I can just, maybe Cecilia, I don't know if you were around for this when Positively Trans and PWN collaborated on the trans-centered reproductive justice strategy in 2018.
Yes, it was. And I'm actually in the picture, if you look.
Right next to Nana there. Anything you want to add about that experience and how that was for you?
No, I think that it's really, a time to build some shared understandings of what reproductive justice is, and also what trans justice is, and and how it interlinks with each other. So it just happened to be also, with a few of our members of Positively Trans coming together with the PWN-USA staff.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so at one of the results that came out of that coming together between Positively Trans and PWN was a fact sheet on trans-centered reproductive justice. And some of the slides that are coming are some of the information from from the fact sheet is included in the slide. So I don't know if that's available to drop in the chat. I think that would be cool. All right, so as we discussed, one of the tenets of reproductive justice is the right to maintain bodily autonomy. So what we know is that trans and gender non-conforming folks are often deprived of their option to have biological children because of coerced sterilization. Coerced sterilization is the practice or incentive, threat of harm or denial of services, misinformation, or lack of information about a procedure. And the consequences are used to influence someone's decision to undergo a procedure that would sterilize them. People living with HIV are subject to involuntary sterilization in over 20 countries under the guise of preventing transmission of HIV to a child. Coerced sterilization reinforces stigma and discrimination and removes the ability for a person living with HIV to make decisions about their own body. Also, there are some states that require a person to provide proof of surgery in order to change their gender marker on a state-issued ID. So being that these are often situations where people are going in and don't have complete informed consent about a procedure, but then are required to have this procedure in some states, which are there's 8 states. That is an issue of bodily autonomy. The 8 states that require proof of surgery are Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Iowa. Next slide, please. So another tenet of reproductive justice is the right to bear children or not have children. Many trans and gender nonconforming folks report facing harassment in medical settings, as well as being refused medical care altogether. This rate is even higher for trans people of color. Because of this, many folks postpone seeking care when they're sick or injured and even avoid preventative care. This also extends to seeking reproductive health care.
Sallie, can I add something to this one? So like we are talking about reproductive justice and gender justice, as like the intersection here. So just to be mindful that a lot of times, like we have to recognize not all people who are pregnant would identify as women, and not all people who are pregnant would identify as, like mother. So, and so we advocate also for like languages shift, like to be more inclusive, such as using the term pregnant person rather than the term mother, and vertical transmissions rather than mother to child transmissions. And, like those are just 2 of the examples.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, I agree that we have to use inclusive language when we're talking about reproductive health. Just a few stats. So 28% of transgender people report postponing or avoiding necessary medical care for fear of experiencing discrimination. And 40% of trans folks postponed or avoided seeking preventative care for the same reasons. And nearly half of trans folks and 68% of trans folks of color have reported experiencing some form of discrimination or mistreatment at the hands of a healthcare provider, including being refused care, being misgendered, and being verbally or physically abused. And 1 in 3 trans folks reports having to teach their doctor about transgender people in order to receive their appropriate care. Next slide, please. So the last tenet of reproductive justice is to parent children in safe and sustainable environments. Trans folks are at an increased risk of experiencing violence from many different directions. One of them is physical violence. And according to the Williams Institute, A report done in 2021 stated that transgender people are victimized over 4 times more often than cisgender people. And 25% of transgender women who were victimized expressed the incident as a hate crime. At least 32 transgender people were killed in the United States in 2022, with 81% of those folks being people of color and 59% of them being Black. And 81 of those deaths were trans women. Trans folks also experience violence from law enforcement. Trans people in the US are more susceptible to violence and discrimination from law enforcement. Trans people experience heightened surveillance and profiling, discrimination and harassment, including sexual harassment, and even physical assault at the hands of law enforcement. Transgender people are also more likely to experience violence at the hands of law enforcement while incarcerated. So we're talking about parenting children in safe and sustainable environments, and I want us to take a step back and think about the safe and sustainable environment first. Before we think about bringing anyone else into our families or creating families, we must think about whether we're safe ourselves and whether we can sustain the type of life that we all deserve for ourselves before we bring or think of bringing other people into our families. So in terms of sustainability, that could look like job security, housing, food, support, and many trans folks experience economic injustice, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide. I just want to give a little bit, back to the other slide, sorry. A little bit about houselessness. So 1 in 5 transgender people in the US has been discriminated against while seeking housing, and 1 in 10 have been evicted from their homes because of their gender identity. And although the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, has created guidances prohibiting discrimination against transgender renters and homebuyers under the Fair Housing Act, this discrimination does continue. Okay, next slide. Just want to talk about economic justice, social and political power. So economic justice is essential to achieving reproductive justice because economic security does not come easy for many trans folks. Trans and gender nonconforming people report higher rates of harassment and mistreatment on the job, and many have experienced being fired, denied promotions, or not being hired because of their gender identity. Trans people also face pay discrimination, and the disparity is even greater among Black and Latinx transgender individuals. Gender discrimination ultimately puts trans folks at a higher risk of poverty. Next slide. So reproductive justice for trans folks includes access to comprehensive health care, family formation of your choosing without barriers, inclusive language, inclusive non-discrimination laws, and ending violence against transgender people. Thank you. Cecilia, anything you want to add before we check in?
Just in case people wonder what this image is, like this is Martha P. Johnson, and one of like the trans pioneer in the movement. So that's all I have to add.
Thanks, Cecilia. So we have y'all check in on the next slide. You could use the chat. Let me know what are other examples of reproductive justice for trans folks.
So maybe I'll add another one then. So safety is a priority. So for instance, like when we talk about pregnant people who are pregnant, like who who are in need of like OBGYN services. Sometimes, you know, like they delay having these services because they might have been taking testosterones and they are like in the middle of transitioning. And so they don't feel comfortable going into, you know, like a clinic that is like all women, for instance, you know, and so a lot of times, you know, like they avoid going until like it's almost like near term for them to have their babies. So we know that for people living with HIV, that's definitely, you know, like a big issue because we want to make sure that they get to make decisions on, you know, how they want to have their children, and also to make sure that they are on the right antiretroviral therapy, you know, so that they can have, you know, like a child like free of HIV.
Thanks, Cecilia. Anyone else? I see Susan, not having to live where environmental justice impacts your health constantly. That's definitely a reproductive justice issue. Research that is not providing research on behalf of trans men, non-discrimination by providers and OBGYNs. Definitely shift in research that needs to happen. That's also an example of reproductive justice, is being inclusive in the type of research that's being conducted. Cool. Y'all can continue to check in the chat, and I'll pass it to Cecilia for your piece.
So thank you, Sallie. I thought that was really amazing. And, you know, like you've covered a lot of points that I wanted to cover. So you make my job a little bit easier as well. So before I go into the slides, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Cecilia Chung, and my pronouns are she and her, and I am a person living with HIV since the 90s. So I'm a long-term survivor, and I started transitioning before I found out I was HIV positive. And back in the days, you know, it was even more difficult to find like healthcare, you know, like because of the stigma and the discriminations, you know, I did not feel comfortable enough to go to my doctor and tell them that I wanted to become a woman and I want to be on estrogen. So I ended up like going to black markets, you know, like for hormones, and have unsafe injections of hormones because you know, like it's not in a clinical setting at all. It's usually just in somebody's like living room, and we each other, you know, like we give each other shots of hormones. And I'm so glad that that has since changed quite a bit, you know, and another thing is, you know, we really seem to like be governed by other people's standards of who we should be, you know, from, you know, how to be a woman to, you know, like how to make choices for our bodies. And so it's really not unique to just one community. I have to say it's really similar to almost many of the communities that we are advocating for. A little bit more about myself. So I got into this work back in the mid-90s. Originally, I was more of an educator and a counselor for HIV testings, and also an educator on sex workers' rights. But, you know, like, but I think that I discovered I cannot just like be advocating for one single issue without linking it to other issues. And so, you know, like, so here I am today, and it's also what motivated me to start the project Positively Trans, which is a network of trans people living with HIV, because we firmly believe that trans people living with HIV are capable of forming our own network, telling our own stories, and coming up with our own advocacy strategies. And, and it is about us making sure that, we get our priorities met and not somebody else think what we should do. And I see that, a member of our Positively Trans group who was in the original community advisory board on this webinar. And another thing is, I think from my slides, I just want to give you a little bit of information, is that I'm not going to repeat the same data that Sallie has. So, and I would instead, add some other points about, what we believe is important for transgender liberations, and also, and how you can support us. So let's go to that slide, please. So Sallie talked about that, and and basically, my slides are also focused on the barriers to health and well-being for transgender people living with HIV, and legal and health priority for transgender people living with HIV. Next slide. So this is one of our older needs assessment, and it's really important to really highlight, here are the breakdowns of the priorities. Respondents, say that these are their priorities. For instance, antiretroviral therapy was not the top priority for many of the trans people living with HIV, and their priorities are more aligned with, gender affirming care and also hormone therapy. And, in terms of discriminations, because of the criminalization environment, and that many states are still having this HIV criminalization law, HIV-related discrimination was one of the top priorities, for legislative and legal advocacy work. And it's pretty self-evident, the rest is employment, discriminations in public accommodations, identification documents, and housing discriminations, which Sallie had gone through a little earlier. Next. So we also have to look at, some of these histories of incarcerations, and, what people know about their rights. And what we see is that, only 44% of people know their right as transgender women, and only 55%, only 40% of people know their right as person living with HIV. So there's a lot of educations that continue that needs to happen, especially when the existing laws keep changing today. Next slide. And so we've gone through this, so next slide. So this is a little bit more of the comparisons, of locations. So we look at our overall needs assessments, and also particularly, the data from our participants from the South. We can clearly see that, there are disparities, even among transgender people, in terms of reporting, state violence and interpersonal violence. And, and this is the continued comparisons of the experience of Southern transgender people and the rest of the country. And, you know, and some of these differences are even starker. Next. So I'm not going to go into all these, so, but it just shows you where we are in terms of like our earned income, you know, like, and Sallie's had raised the point earlier about pay discriminations, and you can clearly see, you know, like that reflected, you know, like in our general survey. So before questions, I want to add some other things, you know, like to that I didn't have a chance to add is that we really believe that you know, it's the same belief. So we believe that, you know, like we are capable of doing our own advocacy, but we also believe that we need to actively advocate for law changes and policy and attitude shift so that all people can live safely, authentically, and free from discriminations regardless of their gender identity and expressions. And, you know, some of our values, you know, that is, you know, I think resonate in the reproductive justice movement is that no one is disposable. You know, the people most impacted by the system we fight must lead the work, and liberation for everyone is both necessary and possible, and our survival is absolutely revolutionary. And, you know, and self-determination is a right, you know, like not a privilege. And if you are interested in supporting our work, we have developed a trans agenda for liberations. Like, well, maybe another time we can go deeper into that. But I will post the link to that to the chat. So if you are interested, you can sign up to demand the Biden administration's, you know, like to implement the trans agenda for liberations. So that's it.
Thank you, Cecilia. That was amazing. And if you want to dig a little deeper or just give like a summary of the trans agenda for liberation, I think we'd love to hear it. We have some time. Okay. So yeah, would love to hear more about it.
Okay, so it, you know, like, and so during the time that the trans agenda for liberation is developed, you know, like we also have the HIV community developing, you know, like the fact sheets on the quality of life, and also the HIV racial justice movement, you know, like developing the call to actions, yeah, the call to actions article. So we have 5 pillars, you know, for transgender for liberations. And the first one is Black trans women and Black trans femmes leading and living fiercely. So we are not only just a racial, we're not just basing our work in racial justice, but we also basing our work in a vision that trans people, especially Black, trans, and non-binary people are liberated, and they get to like be in leadership positions to make decisions, you know, to, you know, like, and to have the rights and the freedom to thrive. And the second is beloved home. So it has like 2 different meanings to that. You know, like one is, of course, it's about housing. The other, it's about like our family, our chosen family, you know, like we get to choose, you know, how we develop our family structured, and, you know, like, and really recognize other cultural practices, you know, to like to be included, so that, you know, a home is truly a home where you feel loved and welcome. And the third is intergenerational connection and lifelong care. And this is really, you know, like an ongoing conversation as well, because we don't see a lot of trans elders past the age of 70s actually. And it's not because we forgot they existed. It's because of the trauma in their lives that a lot of times, like it affected their health outcomes, as they grow older. So we want to make sure that, like we offer the support that's necessary for youth and also for our elder, and, and find ways to help connect them to each other so that, like we can tell better stories about our histories, and also, like have a way to continue to carry some of the vision forward. And pillar 4 is defining ourselves. And it's really about bodily autonomy, and also, like we are who we say we are. And, and it's really important to be reasonable accommodation. Like if I tell you that I'm disabled, I need accommodation. So the question is not we can't provide, but more like how can we provide so that you can participate fully. Another example of that is really language justice, and other access needs that we often oversee. Like for instance, like I'm so glad that we have closed caption for this webinar, but you'll be surprised, how many like webinars actually don't have that, like, and it'll be even better if there are like interpreters for more than just like Spanish and English, because we have to recognize that, in order to be inclusive, we need to be able to include, like all our BIPOC brothers and sisters. The last but not least, pillar 5. Pillar 5 is freedom to thrive. I think that I mentioned that earlier, and the vision is really what our work is currently based on, is trans people deserve the freedom to thrive. We demand a world without cages. We envision a world where people in sex work economies have rights and protections, and where sex work is no longer used as justification for violence and harm. We demand not only freedom, but active community support in building lives for ourselves and our families on our own terms. And below that is the demand that you can all sign on as individual, and I hope you do. So you just have to like include your information, and it will be included, like as signatories to our action demand for the Biden administration. The end.
Amazing. Thank you, Cecilia, for sharing that agenda and the vision. I think like I got like chills just like as you're reading through it. I think it's a beautiful vision and agenda, and I think it's something that we can all fight for. So I hope that everyone is able to fill out the petition and follow the link. I think it's dropped in the chat. I'll drop it again for folks. Amazing, great. So thank you so much, Cecilia. And so can we give Myra, Sallie, and Cecilia all a round of applause? Thank you so much for sharing all of your expertise, your experiences, your vision. I think all in such a short amount of time. I think we covered so many different topics, from gender justice, trans liberation to reproductive justice in a short amount of time. So thank you so much for leading us through this portion. If folks have questions, please do put them in the chat or direct message me right now. I see Wanda, you have a question? You're muted.
Yeah, I was getting a notification out of the way. Not trying to take us down a dark road, but Cecilia mentioned, and hello, Cecilia. mentioned about incarceration. Persons that identify in their own way, whatever trans, gender nonconforming, whatever, when they are unfortunately incarcerated, and I don't wish that on anyone, but if they are incarcerated, is their gender identity respected in prison? I didn't think so, but I wanted it straight from an expert. Okay, thank you.
So I can go a little bit further. So back in the 2000s, under George W. Bush, they passed a legislation called the Prison Rights Elimination Act, PREA. And within it, like there were recommendations that trans people housed with the gender identity, the gender that they identify with, but like now is 2023, not even like a tenth of the facilities have actually implemented that policy.
I have a question.
Yes, thank you, Yolanda. I will first go to Brielle because I saw her hand first, and then we'll go to you, Yolanda.
I know from my experience being someone who is trans and living in and being in the prison system that, like, I know in Texas and Louisiana, if you are a transgender who have breasts already, stuff like that, they provide you with sports bras as you come through processing, or if they don't have any available, they'll order them for you. And then also they give you the opportunity, because I know Texas have safe peds, some like safekeeping. It's a prison up in Austin that they, if you want to be in protected custody, they'll send you there. And in Louisiana, they have David Wade Correction Center, which has a compound within a compound that's for protective custody. But it's all your choice. But they do provide you with, they trying to do better, not saying that they are completely are, but they are trying to move with it slowly but surely.
Thank you, Brielle. We'll go ahead. I know Yolanda, you had a question, and then after that, Keneen.
It's really not a question. It's really a powerful statement. So when I got on the Zoom conference, everybody, and I saw reproductive justice framework, I'm like, oh my God. I'm currently in a doctoral program at the University of Kentucky working on my doctorate in social work. And one of my theories I'm going to use is the reproductive justice framework. And I'm using it with opioid-dependent pregnant women, because if you look at through the lens of reproductive justice framework, it coincides with the Black feminist theory, but also it has measures in there for harm reduction. So when Sallie was speaking, when Myra was speaking and talking about it, I just got so excited, because it's to be honest with you ladies, it's really a new theory. It hasn't been around that long. But I'm just so excited that this fellowship is using that particular framework. And I just got so excited. I just had to say kudos, because I believe it's a very powerful framework, and you can use it through a big spectrum, if it makes sense. So that's all I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Yolanda, thank you for that comment. And I'm just so excited to hear that you're so excited and kind of to use this reproductive justice framework and kind of the tenets that we covered, including, for example, like we had mentioned, like inclusive language, right? Like you had mentioned like pregnant women, right? But not all women or not all people who are pregnant identify as women, right? And so I think, I'm just so excited that not only you are excited about using this framework, but also that I hope that you'll be able to take on kind of the lessons learned in this training as well. And I can't wait to see all the amazing work that you'll be doing. And congrats on your doctoral work. That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. We'll go ahead and pass it to Kaneen.
You are on mute, Kenny.
Okay. Oh yeah. So a couple of points I wanted to bring up before I begin those points. I wanted to say I'm just like I had been triggered by the work initially because of my past of being incarcerated multiple times in my 20s. And I think looking at numbers, seeing myself as a number, that was very traumatizing for me because when you go to jail, you become a number. That's how they call you, by your number. But I've recently been living in New York for the past 5 years, and I worked with NIRI, which was a harm reduction space, and it was all about data and numbers. And so I was able to learn from that experience and develop a healthier relationship with data. And I think that's what's helped me to really just kind of understand how things work. In the South, where there's a lot of undealt with trauma, we're often gaslighted when we have a difference of opinion. They try to make us look like we're crazy because we're not just going along with how things are. And so being in New York, they'll let you know things are going to very much stay how they are, but at least they don't gaslight you. So that was a different experience for me. But, so now I'm able to understand the amazing work that Cecilia has done and has been doing and the opportunities that she is working to create for us as, Black, queer, Indigenous people, just like for people of color, just all across the spectrum. Another thing that stood out for me was the piece about in the agenda having us, having them to recognize our chosen families. Because this is something that me and my daughter are struggling with right now. If I die, I want her to have the power of attorney to be able to, and I was actually thinking about marrying her so she would have the power to say how I would be buried and all of that. So I love this component about, having the government to recognize our chosen family as our families, because we have to be creative, in order to, be able to have the authority. Like if anything happened to her, she will want me to be the one that was doing everything for her. And it's unfortunate that right now, the only recourse we would have is to marry each other, with the way things are now. So I really do like this agenda. I also want to add this, and and this is about the electoral college vote. I have to say this every time I can say it, because when Donald Trump got elected, he had the electoral college vote and Hillary had the popular vote. And so I feel like it's very important in policy making to just always go back to that space, because Donald Trump put people in position to overturn Roe versus Wade. And he was able to do that because of the electoral college vote. And so we need to start having conversations, not just encouraging people to vote, but also encouraging us to be conscious about how the voting process is rigged, because the only way this collective power between trans and cis women or non-trans women is going to be able to gain the impact that it needs is if we at some point address the electoral college vote, because we can keep getting these people that are perfect for the job, but they won't be able to get in if we continue to do business as usual. So that's why I made the comment earlier. I don't think that the system is broken. I think it's working exactly the way the founding fathers wanted it to work. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kaneen. Every time, thank you so much for your comments. Every time, like for these sessions, I just so appreciate it, and it's so true. I yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, I anything else that folks? Any other questions? I know the comments, Kaneen. Everyone, yeah. Thank you for your light. Thanks, Kaneen. Yeah, so appreciate it. Just dropping knowledge every single time. Yeah. Any other questions that we have, comments? I know there's a lot to unpack here. I see Sallie's hand.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. And I don't want to take away from anyone's questions, so please raise your hands if you have other questions. Just want to make a comment about why we use inclusive language when we talk about reproductive justice. So in the inception of reproductive justice, it was required that we use inclusive language. And the reasons why we do that is that we want to be reflective of the diverse experience of all people who are in need of reproductive justice. So we don't only recognize cisgender women, because we understand that whether you identify as a man or non-binary or gender non-conforming, genderqueer, however you identify, you are important and you are included in this movement. And if we leave people out, or we only use terms referring to cisgender women, then we never see the rights of other folks advance. Something that also is important to keep in mind is that when we center the most marginalized person, all of us win. So there's no point for us to only discuss cisgender women when there are other people who do get pregnant, who are even more marginalized than a cisgender woman. So it's important for us to always make sure that we're being inclusive in the language that we're using. And also, language is a serious thing and can be very harmful if not used correctly. So we want to make sure that everyone understands the importance of why it is so serious for us to be inclusive of all people when we talk about reproductive justice. That's it.
Thank you, Sallie. I appreciate that. Yes, thank you so much for always holding our values in the PWN space and beyond. All right. I see Terry.
Good evening. I wanted to make an announcement. I was trying to drop it in the chat, but my technical skills are eluding me right now. So I wanted to invite you guys, because you're forward-thinking, open-minded people, to I wanted to put an invitation to a virtual clapback watch party for the Republican primary debate today, Wednesday, August 23rd at 7:30 Central Standard Time. This event is hosted by Black women, but everyone is invited. We are calling on people to keep the record straight. Live posting on social media. We will not allow women in public office and or women candidates to be attacked, or anyone to be attacked verbally or in any other manner. I have a flyer for you to register, but I can't drop it in there because we're going to be responding in real time with people facts checking, graphics and memes, and ready to post on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. So when they come after the LGBT community or they come after any one of us, we're gonna set the record straight right then and there. But I was trying to, so if you're interested, I dropped my email in the chat and then I'll forward the flyer to you because I'm on a Mac. I don't know how to use a Mac and I can't copy and paste it and put it in the chat. Or
Thanks,
you guys
Terry. And
to
just a
share that.
reminder, thanks, Terry. Yeah, and just a reminder too that PWN, this is a nonpartisan space. We don't endorse or oppose particular parties in this space right now. So just wanted to mention that in terms of C3 activity. Yeah, I think, does anyone have any other questions regarding today's presentation? I know we covered a lot, and we'll also have a presentation in September on abolitionist frameworks. So this one will be a big web session, and we're putting together a really great panel discussion for that web session. So it's going to be September 21st, and y'all can sign up for that through the Mobilize link. So save the date for that in September. Any other questions before we close out? I can go ahead and stop the live as well. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a good rest of your week. And again, I would love to give a round of applause to Sallie, Cecilia. I think Myra had to hop off, but thank you both so much for sharing with us today and presenting. So we're just so grateful, and yeah, and we'll see y'all soon. All right.